China, if you remember during World War II, was our ally. So we were friends with them. In 1949, this guy named Mao Zedong comes into power, and he like full-heartedly like believes in communism. So during this period of time, during his rule, we call China Red China, because remember, like red represents communism, and we put red communism because red represents like evil in a sense. But we're gonna look. Is it here? Yes. Go back here. So this is Mao. He comes into power in 1949. And I'm just going to kind of run through this because you're going to be doing a DBQ on him. It's really not long DBQ. It's actually quite short. But I need you to know who he was and his different initiatives. We'll be looking at Red China for like this upcoming week, so April 6th through 10th. Then you have a break, you have spring break, and then the week of the 20th through the 24th, we're going to wrap up China. So we're going to go over it now so I can front load you with material, do the activities, and then on the 24th, we'll come back together and move on to the next topic. So this is Mao. His goals were to preserve Chinese communism by purging remnants of capitalist and traditional elements from Chinese society, and to reimpose his thought, known outside of China as Maoism, as the dominant ideology within the party. So he changes China from being called China to the People's Republic of China. So you might see it called different things, called the PRC. He wanted to totally reshape China. One thing he put out is something called Mao's Little Red Book, which you can still get, but inside his Little Red Book, it is just hundreds of all of like his beliefs, quotes from him, what he thinks is the right way for the country to run, the way that he wants the country to move forward. And you were like required to carry this Little Red Book if you lived in China during this time. If you didn't carry the Little Red Book, you could get imprisoned or like harmed physically. So he has, like, him being in charge is kind of controversial. Some people felt that what he did for China was good and, helping them really come into the new economic age very quickly, so that they could be like more economically sound. And then others felt what he did and the way he did it was terrible, and he's seen more as a villain. And so when you're looking at your DBQ, that's going to be your DBQ question was Mao a hero or a villain? So depending on looking at this information, looking at the DBQ documents, you're going to have to decide that. One of his initiatives he put in place was called the Great Leap Forward. So the whole goal of the Great Leap Forward was to transition China from an from a farming country to an industrial economic country. But the way he did this was like he wanted to fast track it, and really he did it, but it was, at the millions of people died because of the way he did it. So he moved all of his people into something called communes, which are pretty much just like big communities where everybody shared the work and shared the responsibilities. So like, it wasn't your individual families, like all of the families worked together, everybody's kids were everyone's kids. So his goal was to increase agricultural production, and then also he wanted China wanted China to be free from depending on other countries for different products. And so one of his main things he wanted was steel. So he ramped up the steel production. This had a lot of consequences. So one of them is that he ruined the soil because of the farming techniques. He used a lot of techniques from Stalin. Like he really idealized Stalin in the USSR. So he tried to take a lot of things from him and use that. But it really hurt them. Because after a certain amount of time, they couldn't really grow crops anymore. A lot of the people ended up starving during this time period because they would try to impress him and be like, oh, I grew this many crops. And he was like, great, because you grew 100 crops, I want 80 of them. But they only actually grew 60. So they had to come up with all this stuff, and it ended up leaving a lot of peasants without any food because you were expected to reach a certain quota. And if you didn't reach that quota, then you would be punished. So people were giving away literally everything they grew, and that left nothing for the rest of the people. So there was something called the Great Famine during this time period, which is right here, where 20 to 40 million people died because of his quota requirements. They were struggling to meet them already, which left them starving because they didn't have any food because the food was sent to the government. And then they also, like, the requirement for steel production left a lot of people after time, like, not having a lot of the essential things they need, because they were using, like it says, pots and pans here and farm equipment to turn into steel, and then it turns around and they need that stuff, but they don't have it anymore. So it was really this bad cycle that was created. So the Great Leap Forward was successful in the sense that, like, yes, it pushed China into an industrial type of country, but, like, a lot of people died. So 20 to 40 million people died. It was pretty crazy. After that, like, that happened. It was kind of successful, but kind of not, because you have this great famine. But he puts in place something called China's Cultural Revolution. So kind of said at the top that he really wanted to revolutionize the people's ideas and their thoughts and what they felt was correct. So what he did was, first he removed the current president and other communist leaders out of power. He shut down the schools to use the children as a form of police. The first targets of the revolution included Buddhist temples, churches, mosques, which were razed to the ground or converted to other uses. Sacred texts, such as Confucian writings, which were like, this is all like ancient history stuff. You guys would learn about this last year. He like burned it all, like burned all these books, all of these literature, like all of these different things, because he felt that people might still want to read it and they would be influenced by those beliefs. And the only beliefs he wanted people to be influenced by were his. So he destroyed all of this. And it says like he wanted to destroy the four olds. So old customs, old culture, old habits, and old ideas. So during this Cultural Revolution, like, China lost a lot of their history. We still have a lot of it, but they lost a lot of it, which is a pretty big deal. If you didn't cooperate, you could be imprisoned or you could be killed. And so during this time, 1.5 million people were killed. A lot of others were tortured, imprisoned, their property was taken, or they just had they were publicly humiliated. The schools were shut down for 10 years, which means like really like a whole generation of kids lost formal education. And I know we're all like, school is not that important, or you don't like school all the time, but like it is important. Like if a whole generation of people don't have education, like you're gonna, like, that's gonna really affect your society. We already talked about the ancient texts being burned. It talked about here how he used children as a form of police. He called them the Red Guards. So these Red Guards, they were the youth, like your teenagers. So as kids grew up, they like just joined the Red Guard movement. Or it says, elementary to university students. So they were the ones that were charged with carrying out, like, burning all the sacred texts, making sure people had their little red book. If you didn't have your book, or if you were reading Confucian texts or anything like that, like, you could be, like I said, killed or imprisoned or publicly humiliated. And it was the children that were carrying this out. So this is similar to like Hitler's youth, except those kids were just being trained to be a certain way when they grew up. These kids were actually being forced to be that way at that time. So they lost a lot of time being children and being educated when they're supposed to, because they were busy being his military. So as the Red Guards became violent, Mao and his party realized their violence was affecting China's social and economic life. He called for the Down to the Countryside movement, where in December, young urban Red Guards were shipped out of the country to work on farms and learn from the peasantry. Although the public goal was to teach the Guards the roots of China's Communist Party, the real goal was to disperse the Guards to break up the violence. So they kind of became really hungry with power, and they got out of control. And so he just like sent them away. So he created them, and he was like, oops, they're kind of crazy. Guess I got to get rid of them now. So he like sent them away to do hard labor. So he had like a lot of things he put in place. Some of it was successful, some of it not so successful. But you're going to like look a little bit closer at it when you're looking at the DBQ. So I'm going to stop now, and we're going to talk about what your activities or your assignments are for the next 2 weeks.